Ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Hidden Perspective. This is Rob Greco. It's good to be back. And it's not just me who's back. I'm joined today, and most likely for the foreseeable future, by a previous guest of the podcast, Jules Angelatos. Jules, good to have you back on the show.
Oh, mate, it's very exciting to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. So, just so the audience knows, the plan is to change the format of the show slightly. I do intend to keep the research part of the show the same. You know, that part of the show that tries to provide reliable, non-partisan information on political issues as best I can. But I thought it would be fun to have another voice to discuss that with. So I've landed on Jules. So yeah, it's good to have you here, Jules.
It's very exciting, mate. I was talking to my housemate before we started. And, you know, in a previous life, I was very political, did a lot of this, did a lot of debating, you know, upset a fair few people at lunchtime. And I've sort of walked away from this, and I was like, I don't even know if I actually want to talk about politics and current events. And
you're really selling it, Jules.
Well, no, the point here is I think if you've got a hesitation in wanting to talk about these things, then I think that's the right place.
Perfect. Well, I want you to bring that piss off an audience mindset that you brought to your debating career to this podcast. That's what it's all about, all right?
I'll oblige.
Okay. How's Melbourne going? Since last time we spoke, you guys were under lockdown. It's now summer. Things have opened up. How's life going for you?
Life's a lot better. Yep. Keeping everyone indoors definitely got the virus down. So, you know, we had the advantage of everywhere else in the country being pretty much totally virus free. So, yeah, I think compared to the rest of the world, there's especially a lot of freedom here in Melbourne. So it's good. I'm playing music again pretty often at the moment, which has been special. And yeah, it's sort of the borders keep closing. Yeah. So you can't really plan for any interstate travel or any touring or anything, but shows in Melbourne are a thing, and so I sort of have a life back. It's good.
That's good. It's good to hear. You've also got your sanity back, which was on a nice edge before, so it's good to have you back, Jules.
Yeah, no, I lost my shit. If you watch the first podcast, like I look like someone in agonizing pain. Because I was in agonizing pain.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Which is just a quick plug for the YouTube channel, Hidden Perspective. Make sure you subscribe if you only subscribe to the podcast. But awesome. So, Jules, have you been paying attention to what's been going on in the States?
I have. The day I went camping, I sort of lost reception. And on the way in to the Great Ocean Road, I was seeing videos of strangely dressed people inside Capitol office. And I thought, when I get back into reception, I am going to YouTube the hell out of that. So yeah, I caught up. Yeah.
When I saw the headline, a coup, and then it was accompanied by an image of a guy wearing a Viking hat, something didn't really add up, but it's not exactly what I imagined a US coup to look like. But yeah, so we're going to launch into that right away. And in case you've been living under a rock, here's a quick recap. So on January 6th, the US Congress was set to vote to certify the 2020 US election results. After months of stop the steal fervor, including being 1 in 61 in court cases, that was the Trump campaign, and Trump's impassioned Twitter activity, mentioning the word rigged 157 times in reference to the election, massive demonstrations took place in the US Capitol. So Trump had urged his supporters multiple times to attend the rally, which he said would be wild. At around 2 p.m. on that day, Stop the Steal protesters turned violent. They broke police lines and stormed the Capitol building. After vandalizing the building, stealing podiums, eventually the rioters left the building, but sadly 5 people had died, including one Capitol police officer named Brian Sicknick, who died at the hands of a rioter striking him on the head with a fire extinguisher. Ashley Babbitt, who was a Trump fan, who was shot while trying to enter the speaker's lobby. Kevin Greason, a Trump fan who died of a heart attack. Roseanne Boyland, a Trump fan who was crushed in the middle of Capitol Police fighting with rioters. and Benjamin Phillips, a Trump fan who died of a stroke. And that's all according to the New York Times. Now, it's important to stress that most of these people, I believe all of the people who were actually in the physical building were unarmed, mostly unarmed. I think some of the people, maybe perhaps on the periphery, were armed. But in the aftermath of all of that, more than 100 people have now been arrested, and that number is likely to increase. Around a week after the storming of the Capitol on Jan 13th, Trump was impeached for the second time, charged with inciting a violent insurrection. The Senate now has to decide if Trump will be convicted. In any case, DC is now flooded with National Guard troops who are on high alert for any escalating violence when Joe Biden gets inaugurated. And in addition to all of this, Twitter, along with most tech platforms, have banned Trump, citing violation of the terms. So that's just a quick recap. There are a few points of discussion which Jules and I are going to get into over the course of the episode. So let's just take it back to the events of January 6th. So a lot of the talk, Jules, has been about, to what extent is someone like Trump guilty and complicit and responsible for the events that took place. Obviously, I've been someone throughout the last 4 years who's been quite skeptical of what I've deemed media hysteria. This idea that Trump sitting on a toilet slightly funny is the biggest crime. I think everything Trump does seems to be the worst thing on the planet. So let's just start off. Like, what level of blame can we assign to someone like Trump for these events?
Yeah. I would say, along with his Republican buddies calling the election a fraud, all of it. I don't know. Like, yeah, if it's a stack of hay bale that got set alight, him and his Republican buddies have poured a couple of litres of petrol all over it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And also set the fuse. Like, yeah, they're entirely responsible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is something that I want to stress, that Trump has been saying ever since the election that it was rigged. He's generated some anti-democratic, this sentiment that their democracy had been stolen away from his voters, and I think you can't deny that the proximate cause here has definitely been Trump's actions. And yeah, as you said, he's been aided by some establishment Republican types like Ted Cruz. So moving that out of the way people are trying to label this. Some are calling it a coup d'etat, an insurrection. Is it either of those? Is it something else? Is it just a label? Does it not matter? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I feel like if you asked, citizens of countries that have suffered actual government coups, I think they'd be pretty quick to say that's an unwarranted label.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like what they stormed Capitol Hill and took it. It's not like it's a game of like tag.
Yeah.
Got you. Now we're in charge. Like, it's not how it works.
Yeah. So I've got the definition of a coup here: a sudden, violent, and illegal seizure of power from a government. That would require that they have actually seized power from the government, which hasn't happened.
They occupied like an office building for a little while.
Yeah. I don't
Not
think
the same thing.
Yeah. If you were attempting a coup, I don't think you'd go in there dressed in a Viking hat and sniffing Nancy Pelosi's shoes when you get them in your hands.
They were sniffing shoes.
Yeah, there's a lot of that very unserious, not really activity, which wasn't really representative of a coup.
I feel like if you were seriously trying to take down the American government, you'd probably have to pack some guns.
Yeah.
And some bombs. And the what's interesting about this particular demographic is they have guns and bombs. So, like, I don't think we'll talk about that later, but It's Is it a horrifying scene that a president and Republicans have been able to convince their followers that an election's been rigged and have them so upset that they trash their own Capitol building? Yeah, I mean, that's a shocking sight. And and of course, unfortunately, people died, particularly that policeman, which was appalling. And those people definitely, I mean, from the footage I saw, that policeman was hit on the head while he was on the ground.
Yeah.
And he's just doing his job. So those people deserve to rot in hell and rot in jail. Maybe it's worse than that in Washington. I don't know. But I know killing a police officer is very serious, and those people should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. And that, but calling this anything else, I think, other than, a criminal violent protest is just a stretch, I think. Yeah. Particularly when, I think you got to include the context that these people are actually that angry and actually have that many guns, I mean...
Right.
It's sort of...
Yeah, and it also matters what you label it as. So if you're calling it a coup or an insurrection, presumably there's some extra governmental powers that come along with that. So you can imagine heightened surveillance, heightened censorship, heightened all that. If you are deeming these people, a domestic terrorist group or something like that, I'm not too sure exactly what they are. Not too sure if they have a group, if they are organized or anything like that. So I don't know exactly what gets extended to them. But I think we should always be skeptical of a label like coup when in fact it's a bunch of frustrated morons who are dressed up as Vikings.
Yeah, and that's just hysteria. Calling it that, and it's I think the storming of the Capitol building, it's symbolic, right? So
yeah.
What were they screaming? It's our house. So there was really strong symbolism in what they did. But it's not a coup.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. So another big question that has come up is why the police were so apparently incompetent for allowing these rioters into the building. So I've got a few pieces of information here to share. So the US Capitol Police has the day-to-day responsibility for the protection of the Capitol building. Now, to get an idea of understaffing on the day in particular, some of the doors are actually only guarded. So some of the doors of the Capitol building are only guarded by a handful of officers. Some windows are completely unguarded. In an interview to the Washington Post, the former chief of the US Capitol Police, Stephen Sund, who had to resign after the siege, says security officials at the House and Senate rebuffed his early requests to call in the National Guard ahead of a demonstration in support of President Trump that turned into a deadly attack on Congress. But Sund's superiors said previously that the National Guard and other additional security support could have been provided, but no one at the Capitol requested. In addition, Sund's statement asserts that Capitol Police were overwhelmed because officers were responding to 2 reports of a pipe bomb and another of a suspicious vehicle taking resources away from the Capitol itself. So there are investigations which are now ongoing. Potentially we'll get an idea at some point exactly what caused the police to be so understaffed. I was thinking the other night, is this a product of calls to defund the police that we've been hearing in the US, across the the past 6 months? And I don't think that argument really does apply because just last month, so in December, Congress had actually granted the United States Capitol Police an additional $51 million, bringing the total budget to $515 million. So they were given the financial backing, and the claims of the slogans of defund the police don't apply to a police force that has just been given additional funding. So I don't think we can look at that. But I guess we'll have, in one sense, we'll just have to wait for the investigations to finish, Jules. But do you have any idea of, why why a country like the US, who spends so much on police and military, the highest in the world by a long stretch, would not have the resources, the men and women in the moment to protect the Capitol building.
Yeah. I reckon if I wanted to lead a protest and the president of the United States was on my side,
right,
I feel like that's going to give me a better chance of it going well for me, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, if you have that support.
Will it come out that sort of Trump was puppeteering police and National Guard to make it easy for them to make a huge show of the protest that he was leading? I don't know, but it seems like if he wants to take a photo shoot out the front of some church, he can have tear gas and serious armed forces pave the way for him. So I don't know. I just don't think it should. To me, it's like, am I a conspiracy theorist? Probably, but like, people will get to learn. But like if I'm doing a protest and the president's like, storm this hill and get it, like, that's going to go well for you, surely.
I mean, at the very least, we'll find out exactly what Trump did and didn't do and knew and didn't know on the day and the days leading up to that, and whether he did want to create an extra show of his support as manifested through his protesters. I'm not going to claim that now, but I think it's important to distinguish between those executive calls that the head of a police force could make and maybe someone like Trump could make, and the police in the moment. So I think there's been a lot of talk and commentary that the reason why these protesters were able to waltz right through is because the police love Trump supporters and they wouldn't have treated BLM protesters so kindly. But in the moment, if you're a police officer, and I've taken a look at the footage and I would implore everyone to do it, these police officers are fighting for their lives. I don't think you could say that they just stood back and allowed protesters to waltz into the building, as some people are trying to portray. There's also just the fact that if you're holding a police line, as soon as your line gets breached, there's nothing you can do, right? So, if it's 30 police officers trying to hold a line against, 200 fully grown men who've never been this angry, it's just a matter of physics that the line's going to break. So, to say that, these people were, letting them waltz through, I think is a stretch.
Yeah, and what's the priority? I mean, look, neither of us are experts on protest management, right?
Right.
But if your priority was to not let the bastards inside the building, that may have come at the cost of maybe a lot more aggravation and a lot more violence, right? So they the way that you control that is you get a shitload more seriously armed people. You get those water tanks, you get all that tear gas, right? And you upset a lot of people. They start throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails back at you, and
then you escalate,
it turns into an absolute shit show. So yeah, it's like, what was the priority? Like, to symbolically protect the integrity of our democracy and not let the fuckers in the building. Well, I don't know. This was like the world's least deadly coup. If it was a coup, one cop died and four violent idiots. Now, it's bullshit that cop died, and that's not to take the mickey out of it. It is bullshit, but that's not the world's worst, most violent, awful protest. All things considered, again, in the context of these people actually believing that their election was stolen from them, they made a mockery of the building, which, that building deserves to have the piss taken out of it at every opportunity it can. Because that building's full of a bunch of moral grandstanders, imposing as important and dignified when they're actually, the gatekeepers of a fucking whorehouse.
Yeah.
That sells their country and their environment and their people out at every opportunity they can, regardless if they're Democrat or Republican. There you go, Rob.
There's the hot take. I do want to get to that and the if there's any justification or any what conviction would someone like a Stop the Steal protester have in storming the Capitol? And, there might be some reasons for doing that. But before we get to that, so one related issue to, what the police officers were thinking in the moment, would this have happened if it were, a BLM protest there's been an idea, Joe Biden tweeted this on January 7 that no one can tell me that if it had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesters yesterday, that they wouldn't have been treated very differently than the mob that stormed the Capitol. We all know that's true and it's unacceptable. Now, I don't know about you, Jules, but we did have in the US, there were essentially 7 months of protests. A lot of them were riots that seemed to go on unchecked by power. There was, some people died at this protest. There have been 100 people who attended the protest who have now been charged, and that number is likely to rise. So I just don't understand where this idea is that you can say if it were BLM, they would have been treated differently, when in fact a lot of these Trump protesters are being treated with the utmost severity and they're going to get prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So
yeah, and anyone with any notoriety is being exposed and heinously condemned in the media as well, and across social media.
Right,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, like, Joe Biden's a politician. So his job in life is to look at the events of the world and exploit them for his political gain.
Yeah, of course.
So I think this is an opportunity. I mean, it seems to be a well-held view, and it seemed like a lot of people were choosing to take that perspective on it, that, if the protesters were black, this is what happens when you protest and you're white, this is what happens when you protest and you're black. I don't know, Rob. To me, it's like, again, like I watch the footage, I don't see what those policemen, should have done. I don't see how they could have been more violent or more aggressive. I think things would have gotten way worse had they have gotten
with the
more
resources
violent.
that they had, for sure.
So maybe they should have been better staffed. But were they, like, are we thinking that the reason they weren't better staffed is because they knew that a lot of them were going to be white and not black? I don't
know.
And surely the more important factor between the Black Lives Matter protesters and these guys is that these protesters were serving the president, and I'm sure he was ecstatic to see an historic protest committed in his name. And if there's anything he could have done to help, I reckon he did. So, But yeah,
we'll wait and see exactly what comes out. Yeah, I mean, another kind of related point to that is that the police unions are pro-Trump. They endorsed Trump in the last presidency. So, was there some political bias? Are they going to allow the protesters to overcome it? I don't know.
I could believe that. I mean, and I could believe that police probably have a pretty strong bias against people demanding that their employment is reduced and their funding's cut. So yeah, maybe like I can understand why people want to have that perspective. But I think to me, it's less of an issue than the fabric of the whole American democracy coming into question,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I want to continue in that vein. So one thing that I think has been missed about all of this is that the US voting system has never really inspired universal confidence. So I touched on it in my previous episode on, what was the evidence for the Stop the Steal conspiracy and, was the election rigged against Trump? And pretty much at every election in modern history, there have always been groups calling the US election rigged. It's one of the least trusted electoral voting systems in a group of developed democracies. So you have, in 2016, you have Democrats calling foul that Trump was in cahoots with the Russians. And you get essentially a 2.5 to 3 year long investigation headed by Special Counsel Mueller, spoken about in non-conspiratorial terms by every mainstream establishment outlet, that there's a very real prospect that Trump has been in cahoots with the Russians, and that's the reason why he won the election. And then you get to the end of the Mueller investigation, and there's no evidence of collusion. And so that's how a grievance generated by establishment Democrats is treated. And then you have a grievance generated by deplorable Trump supporters that is shut out of every mainstream media source, and perhaps rightly so, but treated as if they are, these conspiratorial whack jobs who have no idea what anything is in the world. And then you can understand the frustration why these people are internalizing the disparate treatment between a political grievance that is generated by an establishment type and their political grievance. And then you can understand why that fuels frustration. And, people are just acting as if, there are no other motivating factors, no other context that would explain the energy and the anger that was behind these Trump supporters.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. I mean, they took electoral fraud complaints to all the relevant local jurisdictions, right?
Right.
And there wasn't a single judge that wanted to even establish a case, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'd have to be...
Sorry, just a quick correction. There was one case that was successful, and Trump's
one
election legal victory was a Pennsylvania judge ruled voters had 3 days after the election to provide proper ID and cure their ballots. Otherwise, their ballots would be thrown out. So there was one procedural victory for Trump, but it didn't indicate widespread voter fraud and, ballot machines, marking votes as Democrats, and a whole, hundreds of thousands of ballots, mail-in ballots, all being Biden for no apparent reason. So it didn't find fraud.
No, right? And so, yeah, I mean, like my response to your comparison is between this and, say, the Mueller investigation is, well, I'd say it probably was investigated, and any evidence that was available was surely put forward, including to judges that were handpicked by Trump, a bunch of them that were handpicked by Trump. Trump whinging, right before they stormed the Capitol that he was let down by people that he did personal favors for.
Yeah.
The judges, another really awesome democratic sentiment old mate Trump puts forward. But it's like, the thing is, my experience of people who are really into politics is that they just believe the side that they're on. And a president continuing after all those judges threw out his claims, and a bunch of important Republicans continuing to push this agenda,
right,
is just always going to upset and motivate the hell out of people who are going to believe them, and they're going to believe them no matter what. That's the sadness of a lot of politics, is that people follow their side. It's like, I go for the Bombers.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to stand by my football team, sort of no matter what, and I'm always going to think our players are great, whatever. It's just, in football that works because it's sport. It's not. But yeah, politics is supposedly supposed to be a lot more serious than that. But I don't know, Rob. Maybe it isn't.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think what I was trying to get at, and I think you did touch on it. So, there was an investigation into Trump's claims. He had, a 1 in 61 court record, and there was an investigation into Mueller. So both got their due. I guess what I'm really getting at is that, the way those two different investigations are portrayed to people who are everyday folks. On the one hand, you get a Mueller investigation. It's given this credence and this credibility. The phrase conspiracy theory is never attached with it. No one would dare to call it a conspiracy theory. But then on the other hand, if you look at the treatment and the way, I guess the commentariat would look at Trump's claim, it can be as equally as without evidence as the Mueller investigation was, but it's treated completely differently. It makes these people genuinely feel that the establishment is no place for them to take any of their political grievances. A lot of these supporters even got shut out of Fox, which was their channel, and now they're on OANN. And I just, not to say that Fox had to promulgate Trump's claims, but America has a question to answer now. What are you going to do with 70 million Americans who voted for Trump? Maybe, let's say, 35 million of them who believe that the election was genuinely rigged. If you don't give these people 1 ounce of respect, 1 ounce of, one avenue for them to at least air their grievances, I don't think it's going to bode well.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is going to bode well. But this is what's happened. You've had a president, and who even before he became president, when he was running to be president, who was just operating within an entirely different universe to the mainstream media. Right. With his own set of facts, his own set of accusations, his own set of promises, and then it became a sick, twisted sideshow for 4 years. But I feel like that disconnect that people now have to mainstream accepted discourse and facts and reality, like that schism has just been fully achieved, it seems, in the United States. And what does that mean for the future? I don't know. It's the political process is probably fucked. But as you were pointing out, the political process, I mean, I remember sitting in is shit anyway. I remember sitting in year 11 politics or year 12 international politics, and we're sitting there and we go, oh, this is gerrymandering. This is how the politicians in America, because there isn't a separate electoral office,
right,
manipulate the jurisdictions to make sure their constituents vote for them and all the rest of it. And I'm like, this is just allowed to happen? It's like, it's in the textbook. And I'm like, why don't they change this? Oh, because people are really, okay, here's how lobbyists work in America, blah, 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 blah. Again, in the fucking textbook. Like, no one who spends 10 minutes looking at this, it ends up going, this is an amazing process. This really serves the people. The world's going to be better. And I mean, like, Joe Biden's in. The Democrats have a lot of power, and I just can't wait, Rob. The mines are all going to they're going to close all the mines. The trees and the forests are going to go back. The oceans are going to be cleansed. The 1% who own all the wealth in the world, they're going to hand it back. They're going to get everyone out of prison. All the drug laws are going to be reformed. All the racism is going to end. All the disadvantage. The world's fixed because the right people are in charge. So I'm just so excited and so overflowing with joy and excitement for the future, Rob.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't know, man. Like it's like, to me, the American political process was already like a massive turd, and now it's like it's not just like a pile of shit. It's like diseased and infectious. You know?
But, you'd think there'd be bipartisan support for electoral reform, right? Every election, the party who loses is going to scream foul. Well, that speaks to the need for some independent board that improves the reliability of your system. That there'd be some of that, but so little of the discussion in the way Trump's electoral fraud grievance was treated was about, hey, like maybe we do need to improve the system. It's just left by the wayside.
It is left by the wayside, but even in Australia, like, look, we're lucky. We have the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission, which is like this independent arm that regulates elections. Very helpful and important in Australia. But we've got some pretty awful political funding loopholes. And do you reckon there's any bipartisan support for changing those in Australia?
Yeah.
Zero, buddy.
Yeah.
Because
both stand to gain.
Why would you be a politician if you couldn't exploit your power for some benefit? You know? So otherwise there'd be no fun in it. You'd actually have to be interested in taking care of people and making the place better. So there is not bipartisan support for things that are generally good for the citizens and for a fair process, particularly if they're in opposition to, yeah, but hang on, how am I going to get to work for a big Chinese investment board for the next 30 years after I do, you know, my 8 years of granting favors for whoever I need to grant favors for? I mean, yeah, like politics is a racket. And like, I guess what Trump has done, you know, is he's walked into something and he's gone, well, look, it's already a racket. I'm just going to, you know, turn the volume to 10. But
yeah, that's where I think that a lot of these Trump writers that, you know, the sentiment that they hold is, you know, is exactly what you're expressing. They don't have the words to express it in the way you can, but it's that real sense that establishment types have let them down for 30 years. They got, a lot of these people got screwed over by trade deals, didn't relocate to where the jobs were. A lot of these people became dependent on opiates. They've probably seen a suicide in their life. You know, they haven't particularly had some, they haven't fared well in the past 20, 30 years. And it's a political grievance that Trump gave voice to. And they could redirect all their energy, all their frustration with the system. Like, for goodness sake, the amount of vaccines that are being thrown away because, you know, we can't find enough people to give them to. They go off. There are, you know, problems with the bureaucracies administering the vaccines, giving it to the wrong people. You know, Pfizer had 100,000 doses that were left unpurchased a couple of weeks ago. The US government didn't purchase it. The Canadian government didn't purchase it. Pfizer always said they had an extra 100,000 doses. I mean, like, you know, there is a crisis of authority. There is an absolute decline in the competence of government officials. And I think what a lot of the Trump supporters were reflecting in their anger was a complete dissatisfaction with the establishment performance.
Yeah, and that's probably why, you know, and that goes back to why Trump did so well. And I agree with you, but like the question that arose in my head when you were talking before is like, what group of society doesn't have a really good, valid reason to be jumping up and down, smashing windows in Capitol Hill? All of them do. You know? Yeah. What about the environment? What about everyone who's ever thought, hey, take care of the environment, stop destroying this place and start acting as though we're stewards over something special that's getting destroyed? Awesome reason to break the shit out of that building. Awesome reason, you know? What about people who are frustrated at the amount of money that goes to military spending when there's still so many POV people in America? What about all of the veterans who like kill themselves and don't have any money and live on the streets,
come back with
and smash
PTSD,
drugs, and aren't taken care of?
Yeah.
Like, those people have a reason to stand up in Washington and smash all the fucking windows. Right. What about the parents of all these kids who get shot at schools, but by people who just shouldn't be allowed to buy guns but can because, you know, 8 years of Obama couldn't even get the assault rifles out of Kmart? Like, Jesus. Like, you know, like there are reason upon reason upon reason to be totally dissatisfied and appalled at all the people who work in that building. And, you know, it's, you know, in this particular instance, these guys were summoned by the president, and with his seal of approval, they were really welcomed.
There was a direct call to action for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, sorry.
No, go on, Rob.
I think we did tie up that topic pretty well. And just one further point: some people are criticizing any comparisons to BLM protesters because they had a genuine grievance of police brutality and continuing racism in the States. And I'm not here to compare the claims and to what extent one claim is more true than the other. All I would say is that the degree of conviction for each of those beliefs is probably the same. There's probably people who are smashing up Kmart out of a feeling of injustice, police injustice, have a genuine fear of that police officers aren't treating them fairly, to the same extent that Trump supporters genuinely believed that the election was rigged. And I'm not saying those Trump supporters are right to feel that way, or it's a rational thing to do to storm the Capitol building, but the conviction of that theory is the same.
Yeah, it is. And I guess the main thing I wanted to talk about on this was just the lesson I drew from, and it takes a little bit of empathy, but when you deal with Donald Trump and his supporters, it's really unhelpful and actually inaccurate to treat him as some sort of fringe figure, right? So, he was the freely elected president of the United States of America. He won the Republican primaries. I sort of know some things about American politics, but anyway, the point is he's a super mainstream figure. He's the fucking president, right?
Yeah.
And Ted Cruz and these other Republicans, super mainstream Republicans, they're calling fraud too. So as an Australian, you have to go, okay, so I picked the right-leaning mainstream political party in Australia, Scott Morrison, a bunch of significant Liberal Party people, maybe Tony Abbott, maybe Malcolm Turnbull when he was there, whatever. You'd expect better of good old Malcolm, but whatever. The point is, you'd have, and imagine those figures in mainstream society of that level of influence and importance saying that an election was rigged. That's what you have to do. And when I thought about that, I was like, yeah, like I'm actually surprised that they haven't used all their guns, and I really hope they don't. And maybe more of them will. And
it could have been much worse.
And people need to not do that because that's a disaster. But I'm actually really surprised that guns haven't been a thing and grenades haven't been a thing, because it's devastating to say that such important mainstream political figures are basically participating in fundamentally like undemocratic practices. But that's what's happening. And people have voted Republican all their lives. People have all this history around it. And in a way, it's like you'd hope that there's enough trust in politicians, in mainstream politicians, in presidents, that people take the claims of electoral fraud seriously enough to go in and protest. Because that, and I was saying to you off air before, it's like, I couldn't think of anything more distinctly American than when you think an election fraud's happening, going around and breaking some shit. Like that's
Yeah.
important. So in a way, it's like, it's important these things happen. It's important that the Republican Party isn't just some cesspit full of lies and deceit, and that people have some trust on it. Because if the Democrats were just the only party around, I guarantee you that wouldn't turn out to be a great result, right? So these parties need to actually have believers on both sides, have to argue for things and contend. And now it seems like any position you take on the Republican perspective or the Trump perspective is just totally unreasonable and awful and can't possibly be believed and should be tossed out with the rest of your rubbish. And it's like, well, hang on, this is the political process. This is this two-party system. And if a whole side of that system thinks something was rigged and masterminded and cheated, it's really, really important that Americans protest that. Just like I would be protesting in potentially really serious ways here if a similar thing was to occur.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just you have to superimpose this experience on the disgrace of their electoral system already, as you pointed to, and you know, so it's complicated. But in a way, you know, they shouldn't have gotten violent, and they shouldn't have hurt that police officer, and they shouldn't have done such stupid things to get themselves shot. But that's what happens when groups of angry people get together, right? They create these hurricanes, these human hurricanes, and human hurricanes break shit and hurt people. And that's just it's always happened at every protest ever, pretty much. That's full of a lot of anger. Even these hippie protests can get pretty outrageous. But it's wrong that happened. But, you know, in a way, there's a level of heroism there. If you're genuinely of the belief that your democracy is at threat, if you genuinely believe, because someone's lied to you, but you genuinely believe that an election was stolen from you and your country, to go out there and protest and storm the Capitol and say, you people work for us and this is wrong and you can't steal it. It's misdirected courage. And and these people's courage is being preyed upon by a bunch of lying, evil motherfuckers. But there's still some courage in that, you know, and I think it's important to empathize with these people and imagine if you were being spoken to by your hero that way. What sort of energy would you sum up for that protest? You know,
Trump sent me. That's what a lot of them said. Yeah.
So, you know, it's like it's a disgrace. That's where the country's at. But that seems like, considering how many guns these people have, I'll say it again. They have so many guns, Rob.
More guns than people.
They're actually kind of behaving, you know? So let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. So to zoom out from the discussion around January 6th, let's move on to Trump's Twitter ban. So after the siege, Twitter, in addition to Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, Discord, and even Pinterest all announced that they would be banning Trump. Shopify announced it would no longer sell Trump campaign merchandise. And the credit card processing company Stripe will now no longer process Trump's campaign donations. So in addition to that, tens of thousands of right-leaning accounts across multiple platforms were also nuked. Within days, Apple and Google announced they would remove the popular conservative Twitter alternative Parler from their respective app stores. Hours later, Amazon Web Services stated they would no longer host the company being Parler. So there's been a coordinated move on the part of tech companies to ban Trump and to ban, you know, Trump adjacent voices. My initial thoughts about this, Jules, is, you know, I can understand Twitter as a private company having the right to host and to boot off anyone it wants from its platform. But I can't help but feel that the end effect of all of this is going to be the, you know, increasing polarization of the internet, where, you know, at least Twitter theoretically staged left-leaning voices, right-leaning voices, and there was at least some platform for them to engage. I think what we're going to see now is the increasing, you know, fragmentation of the internet, where you're going to have right-wing this and left-wing that, and right-wing this and left-wing that. Do you have any thoughts on the Twitter ban?
He's the president of the United States. It's unbelievable, you know. It's yeah. Part of me's, I guess the question I want to throw up is like, why now?
Yeah, this is
because a few windows got smashed and a cop died. I mean, this you know, these people let this man take office. I feel like if that was the precipice, you know, like it's and that was the justifiable harm. It's like, oh, you know, it's like, well, hang on, Trump's done an amazing amount of damage for a very long time. You let this whole thing come alive, and now you're sort of running away from it because there was a pretty shocking protest. I mean,
Yeah, I've been thinking it was a geniusly timed business move. You can extract all the engagement and ad dollars from Trump while he's president. Wait till the end of his presidency, boot him off the platform, and while simultaneously gaining all the ad dollars, you can simultaneously appease all the woke advertisers because you stand on the right side of history for banning Trump off your platform.
They're not giving back all the advertising money, are they, Rob?
These woke companies are great business people.
And exactly what motivates them? Like they're. Yeah. I don't know. They shouldn't be trusted either. No one should be trusted.
I think go on.
Very interested to see who the Republicans throw up next and what the politics of America looks like post-Trump. Because what's going to be tolerated, by these tech people, because does the Republican Party just look like Trump politics from now on? And if someone who fills in for Trump starts sounding like Trump, talking like Trump, promising things like Trump,
Josh Hawley, do
Republicans just get banned from social media? Is that what happens?
Yeah. I had a really depressing moment the other night when I was reading all of this because, you were always told that, Twitter's a private company. By the way, side note, it's funny how many left-leaning commentators instantly became libertarians overnight. I've never heard these people say, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want, but it's interesting. Twitter is a private company. It can do what it wants. But then the competitor, Parler, who popped up, that's, the market at play, they got banned by Amazon web hosting. Now I think they've had to scramble and find a,
on what basis? Because they're happy to they're going to host Trump.
Yes. So Parler said it would host Trump. No, but the reason why Amazon Web Services cancelled its contract with Parler, it booted Parler off its hosting platform, was because apparently it hadn't taken quick enough steps to stamp out some, incitement, some post from some Trump supporter, which apparently was inciting violence. And then so they booted, Amazon booted Parler off its web services. But the interesting thing is that Twitter is also hosted on Amazon Web Services, and Twitter has also hosted Trump stuff and Trump supporters allegedly inciting violence. Yet Amazon Web Hosting Services didn't boot Twitter off its servers. So
how much Twitter stock does Jeff Bezos own?
Yeah, well, I mean, Twitter's a much bigger contract for Amazon than Parler is. So again, it's Amazon could be seen to
have a conflict of interest.
Conflict of interest. Yeah, Parler actually did bring a lawsuit alleging a conflict of interest. And it's interesting. I mean, there are no antitrust or a cartel-like action which can be brought against all these tech companies because they're not all raising prices together. But it's an interesting kind of, outside the box argument. Well, are they acting like a cartel if they don't increase prices altogether, but if they all make the same business moves in dumping a customer, this customer being Parler? I don't know, it's interesting. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Parler is, though, now a couple of weeks after it's been booted off Amazon, it has found another web hosting company which markets itself as a right-leaning web hosting service. So is this just going to be, the acceleration of this trend is going to be, you're going to have to declare your political allegiance and support companies who align with you politically no matter what. The bakery you go to has to be a right-leaning bakery for you to buy bread. Is this where we're going? I don't know.
I've got a new bakery. It's amazing.
It's not right-wing, is it?
I know. I'm sure it's very left-wing. Okay. But the bread's delicious, which is what I'll care about more.
We've been baking bread over here. We're back in lockdown, and it's a good activity. So
the loaf I bought today actually has some seaweed in it.
Oh, Wow.
It's amazing.
Very Melbourne.
I think it's called Wagame or Magame. Anyway, there's Wild. What's it called? Wild Bakery. I can't remember. But anyway, the bread's amazing. Wildlife. That's what it's called.
Little plug for the bakery on the podcast.
Brunswick East, Albert Street. Yeah.
Maybe they'll ban you as a customer now, Jules. You should be careful.
Hey, I'm not right leaning. No, Rob, what is supposed to happen to all these Trump supporters? That's what I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of what I'm really interested to see what happens in the future. You know, are they all just like a bunch of assholes that deserve to be ostracized from society? And you know, if that's the case, there's a bloody lot of them. You know, and you know, in Australia, you know, we've had Liberal government for a very long time, and it looks like, to be honest, it's going to stay that way for longer. I mean,
and for international listeners, Liberal government's the right-leaning government in Oz.
You know, and so we're, you know, I mean, ScoMo's no Trump, but you know, maybe we can do a podcast on reminding Australians of how many unbelievably anti-democratic occurrences have happened in the last 10 years of government here.
Yeah.
You know, including, you know, doctors being threatened with jail time for whistleblowing when working at refugee camps in Australia. You know, so this just to, you know, and using the military as a way to just do whatever you want and not have to answer questions and all kinds of bullshit that happens here. So yeah, Rob, I don't know. It's like if you're a political leader and you don't support gay marriage, you're going to get kicked off Facebook. Like, do you have to be inciting violence? I mean, look, inciting violence is a serious issue. Yeah. You can't be inciting violence. You know, and the government in Australia really aggressively actually went after Facebook after that New Zealand terrorist attack for not being able to get his live stream video off sooner. So, you know, I've seen Facebook targeted for these sorts of things. I mean, yeah, are they publishers? Are they just, you know, there's all that, you know, do they publish that content? Are they just hosting it? All this stuff. I mean, it's dense, but it seems like that trend you're pointing to where the internet starts to almost get split in half. I feel like that's what's going to happen to society. It's going to get split in half, you know? And maybe people are going to, maybe more and more people are going to live in certain areas, you know, because they know that people around here believe certain things. You know, maybe there's just going to be this escalation in division amongst all people. Yeah. Particularly in America.
Well, you're already seeing that to some extent in the States. Apparently, at least anecdotally, there have been reports of, you know, people flocking to red states and blue states and, you know, making sure their neighbors think exactly like them, which is good for a society, I guess.
Well, if your neighbors were a bunch of racist bastards, like, fair enough, you know, but like, how many of these Trump supporters are, you know, pieces of shit? And my tendency is to maybe assume a little bit better of people and go, you know, maybe they've, look, I really hope they're not awful and racist. Maybe a lot of them are, you know.
Yeah, I mean, 70 million people voted for him. Do you think all of them are racist? I mean, Trump had the highest non-white vote of any Republican in modern history, much higher than his non-white vote in 2016. You know, so, you know,
and you know, how many
it's
of
complicated.
His supporters have been overseas? How many of his supporters have had really awesome educations? You know, and been you know, how many of his supporters have got diverse backgrounds and diverse exposure? Right. You know, it's like people. I don't know. Like, I put it this way: I don't see banning discussion as the solution, you know, and what you're going to have is more and more zealots emerging and more fuel given to the fire. Yeah. That is these people's frustration. So, but you can't be inciting violence. And if you're inciting violence, you definitely need to be off the internet, and you probably should be hopefully in jail. So, you know, but yeah, I don't know
exactly what we think is going to happen when we ban everyone off certain platforms and think that that's magically going to allow these ideas to go away, and that's magically going to convince these people of the error of their ways. I mean, that's, one of the best arguments against censorship is that, if you censor someone, then you lose the chance to convince them as to why they're wrong. And
exactly.
I think we need to go back to that value of open discourse, and that's right.
If you follow what you're prophesizing through, it just means those people will just be non-engagers to other ideas.
Yeah.
And they'll exist in worlds that are unchecked, that are just totally right wing.
Right.
Where everything that they read and watch is supportive of that particular worldview. And they go from, having a well-established regulatory framework to just an open slather. That's what it sounds like, once you're hosted on right-wing tech and you're on right-wing social media with right-wing posters and right-wing supporters, it's gonna be this disparate universe. But I mean, that was what was happening on Facebook anyway, right? So,
yeah.
It's very interesting, and it's probably a little bit terrifying, but everything's okay, man. The Democrats are in, Rob. Everything's
that's
okay.
That's what we're here for, Jules. We're bringing people together. We're allowing a proper discussion of the views. No, I mean, I do hold out a lot of hope for things like, independent podcasting, independent YouTubing. I do hope people are sick of the polarization. I do hope people are sick of the politicization of everything, and they can kind of go to places where they get some nuance, get an understanding of the arguments on all sides, and, have some empathy for people, call out people when they're full of shit, but, call out Trump for being a megalomaniac, dangerous president for inciting violence in the way he did, but hopefully people can come together. I don't know.
And I don't know. And I understand. I was recently on a camping trip. I can finish with this, Rob. And there was this awesome, really big, Mongolian family. They were amazing. And they were camped next to some grumpy ass, tattoo covered. I'm going to indulge in, I would say ice smoking, bone skinny, redneck assholes. And they suffered some racism, and the next night asked if they could camp next to us. And I said, I asked him, I said, what happened? And he said, he doesn't like us and whatever. And I was so upset, I was so upset. We all were, my crew that I was camping with.
Yeah.
Anyway, we spent the next 2 days dining and hanging out with the family and mucking around with their kids, and it was so beautiful. And I think we all made an effort to put energy into socializing and participating with them to make up for the awful experience they had. And for a while there, I wanted to go up to the racist dudes and yell at them, and be mean to them. But I was I remember sitting there with my brother, and we're eating this amazing Mongolian food they cooked for us. They heated up these special cooking stones and laid it with their meat, and it was. And I was sitting there, and I was like, "Man, the racists lose anyway. They lose anyway, because they could have shared in special Mongolian meals and hung out with these awesome kids and experienced this really cool ancient culture." And just met some people and built connections and all the rest of it. And instead, they got to hang out at their tent, smoke ice and be on their fucking own where they belong. So, I don't know. It's if you take the perspective that the racists lose anyway, I think that sort of makes you feel a little bit better about all this, I don't know. Sometimes that was just a idea that I had, sometimes, these people don't even need to be ostracized. Sometimes they just end up alone on their own.
Yeah. They can just wallow in their hatred for the world. And
that's where they end up.
Eventually realize the error of their ways.
And when you're open and you're sending love out to the universe, you make friends, So I wish these people all the best in their self-inflicted misery. But yeah, I don't want anyone to ever think, if they listen to me talk, that I would ever support any of this bullshit that these people have. But my first instinct isn't to destroy them or banish them from existence. It's like there has to be a way to hopefully win them over. But if they're being properly awful, then yeah, they need to be put away. But these people also have this uncanny knack of making their lives shit for themselves anyway. We can thank the goodness of karma for that.
Yeah. It must be exhausting to be a racist.
It surely has to be.
Anyway, well, Jules, I think we've done a good number on this, and appreciate your time. And I guess we'll see everyone very soon, potentially even next week.
All right, Rockstar. Thanks very much.
All insane.
And one final thing, if you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word and let your friends and family know about it. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button and notification bell. See you next time.